Madison Shonland, and we're going to do today is December the 19th, 2024. What we want to do is share some thoughts of which we've titled Where We Are Going in 2025. We've had a strange year, 2024, continued recovery from the pandemic, and the recovery has not gone as well as we would have liked. This has caused all kinds of problems, and we think it's a good idea to take a look at next year. So Ernie, let's start off with the top of the silo, which is basically traffic. Traffic has slowed a little bit, but the growth is happening. It's uneven. It's a strange thing. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the U.S. it went with the economies, and the U.S. economy recovered marvelously from COVID with all the incentives. We had a bit of inflation, but that's calming down now. But the U.S. market really led the recovery. Europe followed back, and Latin America followed back about a year later, and Asia is just now coming into the full recovery period as they're reaching levels that are pre-pandemic. So I think we've seen the U.S. recover first, the Europe second, Europe and Latin America second, and China and the rest of the world, particularly in Asia, coming up third. So this is the year for Asia to recover. So I suspect that if we see growth in airlines, it'll be primarily Asia-driven this year, as they're still recovering from their pandemic lows. So it might be a good time to look at Singapore or Cathay Pacific in your portfolio.
Oh, I see. Okay, I was going to say, to me, when we talk about Asia, the big thing there is India, and their insatiable demand for new airplanes, more and more and more. And that to me seems to be the go-go market in that region.
It is growing tremendously fast, and that's a market that just can't get enough airplanes quickly enough. And with the Tata organization buying Air India and privatizing that, they're going to be well managed for a change, and look also to grow substantially. So I think we'll see the quality of operations in India improve as well as the quantity. So we're bullish about that market.
And I think just one thought on India before we move on to the next thing here is that because Indigo was like at 60% market share, now that you've got Vistara, part of Air India Express, that whole combine forming, it's really good for the Indian economy that you're going to have two behemoth airlines competing, not just one way ahead of everybody else. So I think that it's really going to be an excellent year for India's airline or air travel market.
I would agree, and I think the competition is always a good thing for the consumer in the end.
Right. So let's move on to airline economics and strategies. There's been, it's always back to India again. Indigo, an LCC, has now started to fly 777s that they've leased from Turkish, and they've now got this new big seat in the front. Big seats, premium seats, it seems to be a thing now.
It does, and I think we've seen just certainly the U.S. low-cost carriers, both Spirit and Frontier, have bigger seats available now, and it's to match the revenue distribution that the majors have, because they can attract the premium travelers who pay a little more, and therefore afford to subsidize the rest of the airplane with that premium revenue, or make higher margins. But when they want to put pressure on the ULCCs, they just drop the price to an equivalent level, and the majors still have that buying power and preference that their seats fill up, and then when they shut their window off of low fares, the other guys begin to fill up, and you can see that in the booking patterns from the Sabres of the world that track such. So it's an interesting phenomenon, but premium class or premium economy services are the big growth factor now. We're seeing 4-class airlines, first business, premium, and economy, or 3-class business, premium, economy, and economy, differing from the old first-class locations.
Right. I think that the idea of economy is actually interesting. I think it is closer to 4, because there's economy where you pay to select your seat, and then there's economy, you'll take what you get. That's the cheapest. And that's the segment that is eating away at the ULCCs.
Exactly, and they offer those low fares that are limited, refundable, have penalty clauses, all sorts of other things. But they can advertise that low fare and draw in the customer and pick them away from the ULCCs. And that's important for the Uniteds and Deltas of the world in the U.S. and some of the major carriers overseas.
Now, one of the things that obviously favors anybody in the industry right now is if you can get, or if you can take a new delivery on time. Boeing, the latest numbers for this month that I've just looked at show some recovery taking place now that the strike is over. Backlogs, though, 7 years out.
Now we've got record backlogs, 7, 8, and depending on the model, I think for the A321, we're now looking at 8 years. We're into 2032 right now for deliveries.
Right.
You know, you just can't get the aircraft on a timely basis, and Airbus can't push the supply chain any further than they already are without having it break. So they're looking for additional suppliers and how to really manage that process and grow to where they need to be to meet the demand. Of course, that all assumes that the world economy continues to grow and we don't have any major disruptive factors to that, which a trade war might bring. But at least if we continue to move in the direction we have, that 5% tick up in traffic growth globally just continues to go. And we had the break in the pandemic where it came down, but it's going back up and catching back up to where it should be at that same level. So it's interesting to watch the recovery. We had the different speeds by region, but it's still recovering back to that same old 4.5 to 5% per year growth.
Yeah, the thing that I find fascinating is speaking to somebody in the supply chain this week, and this person was saying to me that they're actually starting to do layoffs now. And I said, but the Boeing strike is over. And this person said to me, that strike might be over, but the disruption to us still continues. And we have to get raw materials a year in advance. Then we have to get it forged. We have to get the titanium. Then we have to forge it. He said that only recently did the sanctions on Russian titanium actually start to apply to them. And that gives us an idea of this. We always talk about this long tail after delivery and spares and how much money you can make as an engine supplier. You basically anything to get your engine on the wing because you're going to make it up over the 20 years of spares. I don't think people think enough about the long tail in the front end before an airplane actually rolls out of the factory. How long in advance the supply chain has to source materials. So that to me is fascinating. I don't think that's something people talk about enough.
And remember that during a good part of the COVID crisis, they kept the supply chains running. And during the strike, they kept some of the supply chains running. So they've built up inventories. And those inventories are now such that they could probably, the inventories at Boeing are such that they could probably build quite a few airplanes from the parts that they have on hand. Right. And those kinds of things don't bode well for long-term production increases until that inventory is whittled down.
Right.
So, if you were planning growth and it isn't there, you're not going to hire. And if your volume actually is dropping a little bit because the ramp up is slow and limited in the case of Boeing by the FAA, they're not going to get above 38 a month. And for a while they were buying at 42, and you just can't sustain buying that long.
Right.
Products that you don't need. So you've got inventory build up, and now you've got the sell off. And if you're selling it off, that may mean layoffs for the supplier, depending on what the position is in your parts.
And then, of course, you have to wait for these people in the supply chain to feel the slack pulled taut again, so they can rehire people. And the gentleman I was talking to was very interesting statement. He said we're very scared because there are certain skilled people, at the peak of their productivity, senior people, if we let them go, we're going to lose them. We'll never get them back. Then we're back to, remember the great retirement that you and I have been speaking about on the site, and the training, the incessant training of bringing new people in. And if you rush things, then you might have a door blow off.
Yeah, the problem is it really takes 2 to 3 years to build a qualified employee in many of these jobs, and to really fully train them. So if you lose one, you've got a gap that you need to fill. And if you lose too many, those gaps can really slow the ramp up on the supply chain.
Now, the thing that's interesting, of course, is that if you're not getting the new deliveries at the rate you want, your MRO shops stay busy because they're getting maintenance work that they hadn't planned on, because airlines have to keep older airplanes longer. So that there's the upside here, right? There is a silver lining for some.
There is a silver lining for some, but it's not necessarily optimal for an airline either, because typically airlines like to trade their fleets in, and they'll run out an airplane so it's got almost zero time left on its components, and
right,
and time it so it's ready to go out of service. Now, if you get one of these airplanes, you need a major overhaul to get it back into service, and that could be a $3, $4, $5 million expense. And if you make that expense, you don't want to suddenly get rid of that aircraft 6 months later. You're going to keep it around for a while. And that means changing your fleet plan, changing the delivery positions, moving something out, and that might move back 3 to 4 years because you've got that many hours that you've restored on the airplane that you want to take advantage of, that you've already paid for. And it may not be reflected in the residual value you're going to get in the market for the used aircraft.
Yes, fascinating.
So there are all sorts of machinations that go around and need to be financially engineered as well as MRO engineered for an airline.
So it's interesting that an anecdotal story I was talking to somebody about today. Ethiopian took delivery of an ex-China 777-300ER, delivered 2 years ago. 3 days after it was delivered, it was parked in the desert, and there it stayed. So Ethiopian picked up this airplane, very convenient, fits with their fleet, everything is great. Within the first day or two of its operations, they had a cargo fire indicator. The discharge bottles into the hold, of course, so that took care of that. Then they had to have an evacuation. Then they had to clean up the airplane inside and change the sensors. So this little disruption has all these anecdotal things going on, and they cost a lot of money. Can you imagine? Within the first 3 days of bringing this airplane into service, you had to take it AOG, not to mention the cost of all those people that you had to account for. I mean, they probably needed meals and hotels and who knows what.
Yeah, just the disruptive costs of canceling a flight we've talked about many times as being very expensive, that people don't realize how bad that can become. So AOGs are something to be avoided, and taking a new airplane increases the risk of something going, because airplanes don't tend to like to sit in the desert for long, and they need to be exercised and flown.
Right.
And this is one example of an airplane that may have been sitting too long.
Amazing. Let's talk about aircraft innovation, because in the end, that's the thing that probably you and I come to sit at our desks every day to think about and ponder about, and certainly we talk about it all the time. So I think the elephant in the room are the MAX 7 and the MAX 10. The market needs them. Boeing has 27 MAX 7s. They have 4 MAX 10s. And they need to get that airplane certified. What do you think is going to happen?
I think it will get certified probably sometime in either mid 2025 for the 7, and which has to come first, and then the 10 afterwards. But we've been waiting for the engine nacelle problem there, as Boeing did not ask for the exception right after the door blowout to have the engine nacelle problem, which there's an overheating problem because if you've got the anti-ice on, it can overheat the nacelle. The nacelle can disintegrate and cause all sorts of problems, especially if it hits the wing and does other things or impacts the engine. So there could be a catastrophic failure. It's probably a remote probability. The pilots know to shut off the anti-ice, but unfortunately, with no ICAS on the airplane, Boeing pilots tend to use a post-it note on the panel to say, "Watch the anti-ice in 5 minutes," so you don't overheat the nacelle. But that wasn't good enough for the FAA, and Boeing has to come up with the fix before those airplanes get certified. The good news is they're testing it right now, which means they're on the final steps. If that's approved by the FAA, I think that's the last hurdle for these airplanes, and we could see certification later this year.
Now, as almost as a sign of the times of, it's not just you and me that are thinking that the Max 7 and 10 are soon to be coming into the market. Pegasus Airlines in Turkey today put in a blockbuster order for 100 plus 100 Max 10s, 100 options, 100 firm, and that's an Airbus customer. And they're still taking new Airbuses, new Neos. So that was a huge piece of news.
Well, they've grown tremendously as a growth airline, and they've had Boeings. I think they started with 737s way back before they
Yes,
got
they
the Airbus.
did.
So they've been a long-term Boeing customer as well. So it's an interesting growth process. But Turkish and Pegasus are both growing tremendously, as is the airline industry in Turkey, which is taking advantage of its geographic position to compete with the likes of Emirates and others, as they can also provide the connecting service to Asia, and they're not that far off from the Gulf states. So good connecting hub, beautiful new airport in Istanbul, and lots of opportunity.
So let's take a look beyond that segment. Trunkliners. Let's look at, let's say, the 100 seats to 140, 150 seaters. The crossover jet, as some people call it. That seems to be a market that is down to E2 and the 220. And we don't know what's going to happen with the C919, the shortened version, if that's going to fit in there. Do you think that segment continues to be a graveyard, or is it still going to be able to grow?
I think it depends on the model. I think the E2 is the 195 is probably stretched as far as it can go. It's a long aircraft. The A220 has some room to grow, and I think the potential for the A220-600 that Air France wants to have, that would be in the 160 seat range, to complement the A321 and replace the older A320s with a more efficient airplane for inter-Europe service, is a real possibility. The question is, when will Airbus launch the A220 and 600, and when will they add to that product line, that product family? It's a young enough and efficient enough design that it has some advantages over the old A320. It would make an efficient airplane for that lower segment of Airbus, and it would offer existing A320 operators, A321 operators could go either way. They could go downsize with the same cockpit, or they can or operators of the A220 in the smaller regional airlines can grow to full size with the same cockpit with the A220-600 instead of the A320, moving to a different product. So it's an interesting fit, and I think would work for Airbus quite well. The question is when and if.
Well,
and I think it's more a when than an if at this point.
Yeah. I mean, Shearer said it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And the rumble in the jungle that I'm hearing is next summer at the air show.
That's a possibility, and that's what we're expecting as well. There hasn't been much new coming out. We've known about the Max 7 and 10 for quite some time. They're both running well late of their expected entry into service, and they're not that new. It'll be exciting to see them actually enter service, but but they've been a long time coming. The new design for the A220 stretch will be an interesting airplane, and I'm interested to see what those capabilities are, particularly in range and seating capacity, and where that trade-off occurs.
You mentioned that the E1 to E195 E2 stretched as far as we go. That I would agree with that assessment. At the recent media day in New York, Embraer people were saying to me, "Look, we need to focus on getting our production rate back to what we had pre-COVID before we, do anything novel." The other thing, of course, is that they have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to slip into the duopoly. And as we know from what happened with Bombardier trying to get into the duopoly, that is one of the most frightening things you can do, to get in between two pit bulls. It's dangerous, very high risk. But at the same time, if anybody could break into that market with a bigger airplane, it would be Embraer.
Yeah. I think the market actually wants a third competitor, as airlines were getting very frustrated with Boeing. In fact, back when just before Calhoun resigned, a number of airlines got together and made a request of the Boeing board to meet with the Boeing board without Calhoun present, which essentially means the airlines asked them to be fired. And that is when the customers fire the boss of the OEM, that indicates the depth of the problems. And they're certainly still not happy with Boeing, given what's been happening. So there's they're giving Ortberg a chance, but the fact of the matter remains that they're still hurting. They're still receiving their product late, and they're unable to fulfill their plans. Ryanair's cutting back routes. Southwest has cut back some routes. They just can't get the airplanes fast enough.
Right.
And that's problematic.
Right. I mean, we're talking about 2025, and this particular issue is more like a 2030 plus kind of an item. However, I think something that we can talk about for next year is the continued rise in the changes coming in the regional market, the rise of the hybrid. We've got Heart Aerospace. We now recently had a conversation with Maeve. We had Universal Hydrogen come and go. We've got Jet Zero, which is still making progress. This to me is a very interesting space. And we also have been talking to people who still have paper designs and looking for investment. This to me is a fascinating place, because this is where the new technology and the new ideas are going to come in. For the first electric airplane or hybrid will be in this segment.
Yeah, typically the innovations like bringing jets to the market went the other way around, with the mainline jets being the first to come in, and then regional jets following later. In the electric game, it's the other way around, because of the heavy weight of batteries that limits what we can do with battery technology, and also hydrogen fuel cells and storing hydrogen, which is a logistical issue. So it's easier to solve on the small end than the large end in the interim. So we're seeing innovation start small and see if it can grow up to the big boys. And so far that seems to be the path to growth. At the same time, we've got the eVTOLs into the process as well, who are also demonstrating electric and battery technologies, and some of them hoping for fuel cell technologies down the road. So it's interesting to watch the various players evolve here. The problem is we've got too many of them, and there's going to be an inevitable shakeout. Some are going to make it, some aren't, and we can't at this point predict which are certain to make it and which are certain to fail. We can say Embraer is probably going to succeed with Eve. There are a couple of others who have major backing and major partners who are probably going to succeed because they've got the financial wherewithal. But some of the others have already started to fail. I think Lilium is an example.
Yeah,
one that has gone belly up. So we've got a shakeout, and I think that same shakeout will occur with the the hybrid electric space as well.
Yeah, that's a fascinating area, and of course, it's a whole new segment. There's nothing for us to use as a benchmark to say, well, this is how it had worked before, which is what we can talk about regionals and trunkliners, but eVTOLs into completely new space. Fascinating area.
Exactly. Even in the regionals, it's all new. I mean, we can go back to the Beech 1900 as an example of a 19-seater, but today's 19-seaters are going to be electronic with one moving part instead of a turboprop engine, and have a lot of differences in terms of operating costs and maintenance costs.
Right.
So it's going to be interesting to watch to see how efficient these airplanes are going to be, and whether they can cost effectively replace some of the lost essential air service cities that have lost air connections.
It's funny that you mentioned the famous line that everybody in this space talks about, that the good thing about electrical power is they only have one moving part, which is true. But eVTOLs have sometimes 6 to 8 engines. So you had 8 moving parts.
Yep.
So don't get too excited. Something can still break. Next thing I want to talk about, of course, is engine innovation. And I think the big thing here this year that we've seen and looking forward is the CFM-GE Rise. That's a fascinating piece of equipment.
It is, and I think there are three major problems with open rotor. One is they tend to operate at little slower speeds. That's not a major issue for regional operations, certainly. But the noise issue and the containment issue for protection in case a blade flies off are critical, because you're going to have to protect it either with a nacelle, which is feasible using some of this open rotor technology, by the way, or protect it by hardening the airframe, but that adds weight, and anytime you add weight, that's a negative. So those latter two problems are ones that really haven't been solved and require some airframe integration with the engine. But with a nacelle, those problems can be easily solved, and that could bring this technology into the market faster by taking it and putting something around it. And as that reliability grows, maybe you can get rid of the nacelle, and maybe the noise problems go away as well. But we've seen UDFs and open rotor designs going back to the 1980s, and demonstrators on an MD-80.
Right.
So it's not new, but some of the technologies that go into manufacturing those engines and making them more efficient are new. And so we've got additive manufacturing, higher internal core temperatures, cooling materials, cooling coatings. A lot of the technology that's come out of the more advanced engines out of the GTF, the LEAP, and the Trent engine family are now going to be applied to the new open rotor technology as well.
Right.
The problem we have, of course, is that we're pushing the envelope all the time with these new engine technologies. And when you push the envelope a little bit too far, you can fall off the edge. And that's what happened with the GTF. It's happened with the Trent 1000. It's happened a little bit with the in certain conditions with the A350 engine, the other version of the Trent, and even some of the GE engines for 787. So we've got we've had issues where we've pushed a little bit too fast and had to crawl back a little bit. And the risk factor for the engine manufacturer is that extra 1% of fuel economy versus not having it, and increased reliability.
It's interesting. Anders at Hart was talking to me about this and said that if you look at the marginal fuel improvement on a turbofan, he said the line is now getting close to flat. So, what are you going to do what's your next breakthrough? Which is why he's so gung-ho, obviously, at the Hart the hard solution, which is electric primarily, as the way forward. The one thing that about the rise, just before we go on, that really intrigues me is that if you're going to go with an open rotor solution, that engine, the diameter of that motor is big. It's with the blades. That's a wider diameter than you would have with then a LEAP, for example. It also means that potentially, if you are Boeing or Airbus, whereas on the 737, they've selected one engine, but let's take Airbus on the 320 family, you have a choice of engines. Will you be able to have that same choice of engines if you're going to say, I can take the Rise engine on my 320 Neo, 321 Neo? Will I also be able to take a GTF? Won't you have to, do you not get to split in the road here where you have to decide, I'm going to be able to handle an open rotor, or I'm going to stay with closed rotor, which now what's interesting here is Airbus seems to be favoring the Rise solution. Boeing is not so sure. Their X-66A is using a GTF. They're staying with the closed rotor. So this is another very interesting activity to watch, to see how these experiments and how the testing and the learning goes.
Yeah, I think Safran earlier this week indicated that the Rise open rotor technology could be used with a nacelle around it. So that's an interesting revelation there, that if you need to go that way for either noise or safety component, an uncontained failure, then you could do that with a nacelle around it as well. So that choice might still be available to a Boeing, and it might just require a little different configuration of that open rotor technology. But the core of the engine and the larger diameter and the efficiency could remain a key element here.
Another thing that I think is fascinating is that the top of the props on the open rotor will be turning above the wing surface, right? That's going to create swept wing.
It appears so with that diameter.
Right, so you're going to have a swept wing effect, which is really good.
Yeah, the aerodynamics of the engine airframe combination may dictate that you use one technology or another, and that's where I think that decision comes into play.
Well, that's the fork in the road situation. Anyway, let's move on. We don't want to bore people. We're already at 43 minutes here. So let's talk about some things that we are sort of back to where we are these days. GTF, it seems to be on track, but boy, has that been an uphill battle to get those engines fixed.
It has been, and there's still going to be quite a few airplanes out of service this year before it gets better in 2026. So I think 2025 is going to be another tough year for certain carriers that have a lot of GTFs as they rotate in and out. Ones that have gone through maintenance and induct the rest into the required maintenance as they go along here. The good news is that the new airplanes being produced are going to be fine, and that they're producing enough spare parts to continue that process on target and on schedule as they're moving forward. So I think Pratt has stepped up to the best of its ability, but it still hurts an airline when you can't grow because a good chunk of your fleet is down.
Fascinating comment made to me many years ago when the GTF came out, from obviously not from within Pratt & Whitney, but this person made a comment to me that was, Pratt & Whitney has no idea of this pressure they're going to be facing in terms of the volume of work. There are other people like CFM who've been operating at these rates and understand the stress that creates and how far you have to go with backup in everything inside the company. Pratt seems like the GTF was a success that they weren't ready to handle the way they could have. if you look back in Pratt and Whitney's history, the last time they made engines at that rate was World War II. That's
Yeah,
when they had to generate engines like at an incredible rate. They have to generate these motors at an incredible rate. And Rick Durlow once said to me, we don't have enough forging capacity on planet Earth to supply everybody. And I think nothing's improved there.
that says something about the supply chain.
Right. Fascinating. Let's talk about the Trent, because that engine doesn't, we always talk about the LEAP, the GTF, and even the G9X, which we haven't mentioned in this call yet, but we tend to focus on that and we don't talk too much about the Trent. And quite honestly, if you look at how the 350 and the 330 Neo even are picking up business, Rolls-Royce's footprint is growing. But they've run into some trouble with the 787.
They have, and I think that's been problematic for them, just like it's problematic for Pratt with the GTF, with the problems that have emerged. So they've inducted their first engine, I think, this week into the MRO for repairs and the fix that they're going to roll out to the industry. So that's good news, is they've got a solution now, and the question now is how long it will take them to complete that, and how much capacity they'll have for the parts and support necessary to take that out in the MRO world.
I wonder what they're going to have to do to the Ultra that they're working on to make that engine stable from the get-go.
I think the key lesson that the engine makers are learning is that they have to make an engine bulletproof before they release it, and that may mean more intensive testing and more intensive wear and tear. But you've got to be able to operate in the airline environment and operate with some strange conditions if you're going to be flown by people who are based in Dubai with desert sand blowing, or based in Greenland where you've got lots of blowing snow.
Right.
There's a vast difference in operating in rust-oriented wet climates to deserts, and they impact their engines in different ways. So we've got an engine OEM has to be ready for everything.
Right.
And that's a heck of a lot of testing. It's not just a tested under standard temperature and pressure. You've got to go to the extremes, and those extremes with global warming are getting more extreme.
Bernie, we have to wrap it up here quickly. Let's talk about the economy. Trump 2.0. What do you think? Trade wars? No trade wars?
It's a possibility. It depends on whether he's bluffing and using it as a negotiating card, or whether he means it. And it's hard to tell with Trump, because he's mercurial by design and doesn't want people to know what he's thinking, and wants to be able to surprise people. So that's a question that we don't really know the answer with. I'm assuming that on sometime in late January, early February, we'll find out an answer. But implementation of tariffs could cause a global economic collapse, and that's not a good thing.
Right. Last question we can handle. Look at here is the deficit U.S. deficit reduction issues. Overnight, the CR seems to have failed. There are more shenanigans going on right now in Congress to try and still spend money we don't have. What do you think is going to happen here with the deficit reduction attempt in the new administration?
It'll be interesting to see what happens. It'll be the Musk and Ramaswamy show, that in the Doge that will be running that, the Department of Government Efficiency, or whatever they're calling it. I always thought the Doge was the old ruler of Venice, but that's a whole other story. But at any rate, the impact of the continuing resolution, if something doesn't get done, means that TSA agents won't be getting paid, so the airports may shut down. That would not be a good thing if a government shuts down before the end of the term. So that's a risk. And when was the government funded through? Was it through December or through January? I'm not sure what the when the
Yeah, I'm not
comes
sure
into
either.
effect.
But the only thing that I'm confident is that our members of Congress will do what's good for them and not good for anyone else. That they'll continue to do whatever is good for them.
I think that's a given with politicians of all stripes. But
Right.
The impacts, I think, if past his prologue, Trump is not a favor of regulations. He likes to have more free trade for business and more freedom for business. So if he eases things, will he ease restrictions on Boeing for the FAA? Will he ease up on the designated authority process? Will he require more of the regulatory burden to be paid for by the companies, or would he try to cut the red tape? And when you're dealing with safety issues, cutting red tape is never a good thing.
Well, right, Ernie. Nice call. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Take care.